Good evening. Welcome to the August 27, 2018 meeting of the Stillwater City Council and the Stillwater Utilities Authority and the Stillwater Economic Development Authority. We're going to switch it up a little bit tonight since our City Council agenda is the longest of the three, and we're actually going to start out with Stillwater Utilities Authority, if that's okay with everybody. Get you out of here quicker, Lauren. All right, well, I will call the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting to order, and I'll ask you to rise and, well, can we do the pledge at this point since it's not on the agenda? Let's do the pledge now. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, that takes us to item 2 on the Utilities Authority agenda. That's the consent docket. Trustees, any questions, comments, or motions on the consent docket?
Motion to accept the consent docket.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the consent docket. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the consent docket is approved. That takes us down to item 5, general orders. Bid recommendation on authorization for staff to execute the contract for 6 electric substation transformers to the lowest responsible bidder, Pennsylvania Transformer, in the amount of $3,466,326, and authorize expenditures from the Electric Rate Stabilization Fund up to $3,812,958. This is SUA-18-34. Mr. McNichol.
Lauren Smith will provide that report.
Good evening, trustees. Lauren Smith, Electric Utility Director. Kind of short and sweet, we received 5 bids. 3 were considered non-responsive. They would not agree to, they wanted to negotiate our terms and conditions, which it clearly said in the bid that we would not do. And they would not agree to firm pricing, which is also a requirement of the bid. And so that left us with Pennsylvania Transformer and OTC Services. So with the others being non-responsive, Pennsylvania Transformer was declared the lowest and responsible bidder. And I have a recommendation, but I'll be happy. I think you guys have questions, and I'd be happy to answer any that I can.
Trustees, questions? I think we're good, Lauren.
Okay, all right. Staff recommends that the trustees award the bid and authorize staff to execute the contract for 6 electric substation transformers to the lowest responsible bidder, Pennsylvania Transformer, in the amount of $3,466,326, and authorize expenditures from the Electric Rate Stabilization Fund up to $3,812,958.
Just an easy question. Why the difference from the bid to the authorized expenditure?
Oh, that 10% contingency.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry about that. I should have mentioned that. It was on the report.
That's all right.
Includes a 10% contingency.
Thank you, trustees. Questions, comments, or motions?
Motion to approve the staff recommendation for the trustees to award the bid. Do I need to read the whole thing?
No, I don't think so.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendation. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that item is approved. Thank you, Lauren. That takes us to reports from officers and boards. Mr. McNichol.
No items.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dorman.
Nothing to report, sir.
Trustees,
No.
is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the Stillwater Utilities Authority meeting. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, we are adjourned. All right, I will now call to order the Stillwater Economic Development Authority meeting. And we will jump to resolutions here. Item 3, Resolution SEDA-2018-2, a resolution authorizing the assignment of a Stillwater Economic Development Authority revenue note and approving and authorizing to approve, finalize, execute, modify, and or deliver the necessary or appropriate transactional document regarding assignment of the note. Mr. McNichol.
The resolution was prepared by the City Attorney's Office, and Melissa Reams has a explanation of the need for the resolution.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Councilors. Melissa Reams, Chief Financial Officer. This body entered into a development agreement back in 2014 with Stillwater OK LLC to develop a TIF out on the north end of Perkins Road. And through the process, we have entered into a note that you all formalized last November. I believe it was November 14th, 2017. The developer now is wanting to assign those payments to a bank, Arvest Bank, to help him monetize the value of the TIF payments or the note payments. And that's what he's asking you to do tonight, is to sign the documents as needed to get that assignment, or authorize that assignment of those payments.
So he is taking the note where we're paying him and he's selling his right to get that money to somebody else?
Yes, he's monetizing that revenue stream. And so what we're going to do, part of the agreement, I believe, is that we, instead of sending him the payments, we're going to send the payments directly to Arvest to satisfy the note.
Does it change our obligations at all on the note?
Not at all. Not at all. And if the sales tax dwindles or the entities no longer occupy the space out there, then the payments decrease and it reverts to him as a liability at that point.
Trustees, any other questions?
So it doesn't change anything except the address where we're sending payments?
Correct. That's my understanding, yes.
It doesn't change the schedule of sending or anything?
No, we still will pay him for December. We pay him March or April, first part of April, for the 6 months that end in the previous December. And for the 6 months that end in June, we send that payment in September, October timeframe.
All right.
Any questions?
Any further questions, trustees? Or motions?
Motion to accept approve, adopt, what do we do?
I think adopt.
Adopt the resolution.
Do we need to read that, or?
No, he's already written.
I did.
Okay.
SEDA 18-18-01,
2018-02?
2018,
No,
Should be
Oh, that's the-
1802.
okay.
it's different on the attachment and the agenda.
Okay. Which one is right?
02.
Okay.
All right, we have a motion to adopt SEDA-2018-02. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Trustees, please vote. With a vote of 5-0, resolution SEDA-2018-02 is adopted. Reports from officers and boards. Mr. Dorman.
Nothing to report, sir.
Mr. McNichol.
Nothing, sir.
Trustees?
No, sir.
That takes us to item 6. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the Stillwater Economic Development Authority meeting. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, SEDA is adjourned. All right. That takes us to the Stillwater City Council meeting. I'll call the Stillwater City Council meeting for August 27, 2018 to order. And we will jump down to the consent docket. Councilors, questions, comments, or motions regarding the consent docket?
Motion to approve this consent docket?
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent docket. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, the consent docket's approved. All right. That takes us to item 4, public comment on agenda items not scheduled for public hearing. We do have one person signed up for that item. Ms. Shirley Weeks is here to talk about item 6B under general orders, the discussion of motorized scooters. Ms. Weeks?
Do I talk now or when you all talk?
You'll talk now. This is not an item
Okay.
for public hearing,
Okay.
so this is your chance
Thank
to
you very
speak.
much, Mayor. My name is Shirley Weeks. I live at 71 University Circle. In 2012, the city opened a private driveway onto University Circle from a residence hall parking lot. Not a welcome event for the neighborhood. Residents on Circle Our Greek neighbors are the resident hall neighbors. When the driveway was opened, there were some restrictions. No trucks, left-hand turns only from parking from campus to the circle. The new OSU parking garage would have an exit onto Monroe Street. None of these items are in reality today. We have traffic of all kinds: cars, large diesel pickups, motorcycles, motor scooters, bicycles, longboards, fire trucks, dump trucks, semi-trucks, carrying large cranes, mini food trucks, university service equipment, and pedestrians. Lots of walkers and runners. A brief sidewalk and then no sidewalk on either side of University Circle. And just today, we had a new bird scooter on the street. Apparently, malfunction had happened, and it was parked by the fire hydrant, and the rider departed. I would ask you to take a look at the private driveway and the dangers it presents to the residents of the area. And many people use this private driveway that don't live in the area. It is the only through street from Duck Street to the University Circle that is not controlled at some part of the day by the university. I would like to ask you I question the bird electric scooters would be of benefit to the area of the city where I live. And I thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Weeks. Okay, that takes us to item 6A on general orders, FAA grant applications and funding options for runway 4-22 rehabilitation and LED lighting project. This is CC-18-102. Mr. McNichol.
Gary Johnson, our airport director, will have that report. Before he starts, let me explain to you that this is a bit of an unusual report. We're providing you with information on possible federal grant in varying amounts and give you 4 options, and it's kind of different. So if you have questions, please let us know. The issue is that the grant application deadline is so short that we don't have a meeting before that grant application is available. And I think, what is there, 5 days, Gary, between the time they tell us what's available and the due date of the grant?
Correct.
So it is a really, really tight timeline.
Good evening. Gary Johnson, Airport Director, Stillwater Regional Airport, Mayor, City Councilors, and City Manager. Glad to be here this evening. I presume you've had an opportunity to look at the report. We are thrilled to be getting the reconstruction funding for this runway. However, the bids that we have received are in excess of the amount of grant that was programmed. They are looking at 2 funding options, the traditional airport improvement program funding and supplemental funding. And we would normally, as Mr. McNichol said, be bringing a bid recommendation along with approval of a grant application, other than they are still trying to help us get the amount of money that we need to cover this. So tonight, we're looking and asking the City Council to authorize the mayor to complete multiple grant applications that will be used to get the additional funding by the FAA from either Airport Improvement Program or supplemental. The applications don't obligate us. It's just going to help them find the remaining money that we need, and we will bring back the recommendation for the bid at a subsequent meeting, probably September 10th. But they are looking for that money for us, and this is one of the ways that we can help that process. I don't know if that explains all the questions you might have, but that's kind of an unusual position for us, but I think a good one in getting the final results.
Councilors, questions? Excuse me, councilors, questions?
So this is, as the recommendation says, the approval tonight would be to complete the grant application.
That is correct. It would be complete the grant application, allow the mayor
There are
to...
two different options of grant applications, and once it comes about, I mean, this does not obligate us to anything except
That
writing
is
the grant.
correct. They will still have to submit a grant offer back to us based on which of the applications they find funding for.
Are the two different choices here, the project cost of $4 million or the project cost of $3.3 million, are those the two different bids? Or are
No,
those?
it's actually two different combinations of bids. The bids are so close that depending on which of the alternatives that are selected, that will determine who gets the bid. We didn't dissect those in this report because we really can't recommend one bidder over the other one until we know we have the funding.
Okay. So we'd be completing both grant applications, whichever one gets approved, or whichever one they find funding for, then we would then vote to accept the bids that match that grant application.
That is correct.
Okay.
It'll actually be about 4 grant applications that match the alternatives with those two bidders.
But in the end, only one would be submitted, once we found out
That's correct.
What-
One bidder. would
what
be-
funding's available.
That's correct.
So tonight, we're really just giving the approval to go for the grant.
That
Nothing
is
else.
correct. We've provided 3 options there, and I failed to mention, but we do have our matching funds in hand to match up to the maximum amount of $400,000 local funding, which would equal about a $4 million total project. If you'd rather go with a smaller amount, we can do that, but we'll get less grant money and less work. So that would be option B.
I think I may have the same question as Mayor Joyce, but I just want to clarify. So the grants are not different amounts. Is one grant, so if one goes through the AIP and one is supplemental, does supplemental only get approved to a certain amount and that's why there's different amounts, or the actual bid amounts are different based on the grant funding that comes available?
The bidder, of course, will be, depending on how much funding's available, the 2 different funding sources may be issued in 2 grants. One, an airport improvement program grant, which is normal, and that's other part of the project awarded in a supplemental grant. Or they may do both of them
In one
in the
grant.
supplemental or the AIP.
Okay, I understand.
I hope that answers.
Yes.
Further questions, council? Could we have your recommendation?
Recommendation would be to go with option A and authorize the mayor to sign all the grant applications for funding.
All right. Thank you, Gary. Councilors, further discussion or motions on this item?
Motion to approve the option A for the FFA grant application to begin the process.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to accept staff recommendation on this item. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that item is approved. That takes us to item 6B, discussion as to possible courses of action regarding motorized scooters in public rights-of-way. This is an item that came to us late last week without much forewarning, and I know staff has taken a lot of time dealing with this over the last couple days of last week and today. So I think we'll let Mr. Dorman start with an explanation, or do you want to start?
I think
Here?
Norman probably will kick it off.
Okay.
Well, the morning of the 23rd, we discovered that bird scooters had swooped in here and located what they describe as nests in a number of locations, and I believe there were about 40 of these things dropped on us early Thursday morning. No prior contact from the company, no attempt to contact the city prior to placing these things in the public right-of-way. And the main problem with this is, one, we have several ordinances that are in conflict with this group's retail rental operation. That is, one is that without a permit, we do not allow commerce on public property. And the other, I'll let Mr. Dorman get into, which is a myriad of traffic ordinances and bicycle ordinances, and what constitutes a scooter and what constitutes a motorized scooter, and all kinds of things that also seem to be in conflict with their operations. So I have talked to several times a representative of the company. I've made arrangements to contact this individual in the morning with whatever information we glean tonight. They stand ready to do what they need to do to continue their operation here. So with that, I'll kick it over to Mr. Dorman and let him explain the issues with our ordinances.
Basically, we have three issues that we need some guidance on. Number one, as Norman mentioned, is they're operating in the right-of-way without any type of permit. Normally, we would require someone to come in and get a right-of-way occupancy permit, or if they were operating on a temporary basis, we would have them come in as an itinerant merchant, like we do with food trucks, things of that nature. And so without the benefit of doing any of that, they're basically trespassing on city right-of-way at this point. So as I mentioned to some of you, my recommendation to Norman was to get a hold of these people and try to get them to make an application for an itinerant merchant license, which would allow them to basically operate for about a year legally in the right-of-way if we execute an appropriate right-of-way agreement. And they would, and during which time we can see what else can be done with respect to this type of operation. But so number one, we need to deal with the trespass issue. Number two is the whole issue of obstructing the sidewalks. And the sidewalks are what they are here in town, and we do have requirements for safe passage that are imposed by state law, and certainly the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if you go around and look at the various nests, as they call them, they are sitting, in many instances, right in the middle of the sidewalks, or in parts of the sidewalk which will make it difficult for somebody in, say, a wheelchair to get by. So the permitting will allow us to identify appropriate locations on the right-of-way where they can locate, and then not cause these obstructions, which affect the ability of other lawful users right now, quite frankly, to use the right-of-way. The third thing is the most interesting question, and that is, where do these things even fall within our ordinances? They call them scooters, and if you've been following the press releases, there's basically two different ways you can interpret our ordinances. There's one set of ordinances in Title 29 that basically refer to what are known as motorized scooters. And motorized scooters are a functional equivalent of a bicycle. And then there's a second set of ordinances that refer to motorcycles and motor scooters. And these are basically the equivalent of a motorcycle. And so anyways, we don't define what a motor scooter or a motorized scooter is in our code. And partly the reason we don't do that is because when you get the traffic codes, state law prevails. You can't have different traffic laws in every town. So the courts have made it quite clear to the cities over the years that you have to follow the state's lead in this regard. So we defer to the state definitions on these items. Well, if you go to the state statute that defines what a motor scooter is, it says it's a motorized scooter. So that makes it a little harder to work through. But anyways, so depending on how you interpret this, they're either, you could argue that they were lawful if they were like a bicycle, or you could go right into section or Article 8 of Chapter 29, where it expressly says motor scooters are prohibited on the sidewalks. So that's kind of the dilemma we have. I can't fix this by just doing definitional coverage, and so probably what we will have to do to resolve this issue is to go in and create a new article that will deal with everything between a bicycle and a motorcycle. In other words, you would have a section that would deal with motorized bicycles, for example, these small scooters, which are the ones that are not licensed, variations of skateboards, things like that. We can lump those into a new category and basically define where and when they can be used and who can use them. Because the other problem with this is that there's not really, if it's a motorcycle, anyone under 18's got to wear a helmet. If it's a bicycle, that's not necessarily required. So you get into, there's a lot of issues that we still need to resolve here. But that's the third issue, is just whether they're even on the streets or not. We generally take the position when we look at prosecution of these types of offenses that if we can't tell what the law is, then we're not going to impose it on someone else. Hence the second press release that came out that basically said, you know, it is what it is. We're not necessarily going to enforce this at this time until we can resolve it. So we're kind of stuck, for lack of a better term. So those are the three issues, and what Norman and I were hoping was that we could go through each one of these issues and get a resolution so that we can move forward on this. What we understand is that probably there is an interest in trying to accommodate not only the scooters, but all of these new technologies, because none of our codes really cover things like bike sharing and motorized bicycles and all that, and so we need to go ahead and fix that, and we can fix it in a larger sense, but we can also put for lack of a better term, a patch on it in the short term. And so we had a number of recommendations that we would make, and based upon your wishes with regard to how to proceed with this.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy.
Thank you. I hope that helps people in town understand why this has been such a back and forth and some lack of clarity around exactly how we're going to deal with this, because they don't fit neatly into our existing categories, and so we've had to kind of figure that out as we go. So we should probably just take these one at a time, right?
Okay. Well, the first thing would obviously go back to the most fundamental issue, which deals with the right-of-way, getting them in the right-of-way legally. And so the first recommendation that I was going to make was that Norman continue his conversation with them and give them till the end of the week to basically get an application on file to get a right-of-way permit. And by getting an itinerant merchant's license and negotiating an agreement, which the itinerant merchant's license provides for them to operate in the right-of-way. And to do that, we would be able to verify that they have appropriate insurance, that they are properly bonded, that they meet certain requirements that we need for them to meet to operate safely in those rights-of-way. So that would be the first recommendation, is to give them till the end of the week to get that on file with us, which is, quite frankly, people walk in here and do itinerant merchant licenses all the time. Hers here can basically process those rather quickly. So if they do the work and a fairly minimal amount of that, they should be able to meet that deadline. We don't think that's unreasonable. If they don't meet it, then my recommendation would be to direct the city manager to remove those from the right-of-way until such time as they get into compliance, which has been the MO of most cities that have worked with them. But if they're willing to work with us, we want to keep this thing moving along. So that would be the first recommendation.
How long does that license, is there a timeline or time frame that license is good?
It's good for a year.
1 year?
And a lot of people just come in and renew them. And so if you see, because the itinerant merchant license also applies to merchants who are in, say, parking lots and things like that, like under the sun, that were over in the Food Pyramid parking lot. They get a license every year. And so you can get an annual license, and if they didn't want to go with an annual license, then they would have to apply for a formal right-of-way permit, which is a little more onerous than getting an itinerant merchant's license and getting a contract under that. But that option's available to them as well. But, and this would obviously buy them time to see what we do with the ordinances and to move forward with that.
Would it allow us to, within the permitting of that, to define kind of how many scooters they might have, or how many, kind of, again, you were talking about the ADA compliance, making sure, or trying to ensure that they are operating in areas where we maintain ADA access and things like that, that itinerant permit would allow us to have those conversations with them?
Yes, the contract that accompanies that, which would allow them to use the right-of-way, it could set the total number they could have at any one location. We can establish they'll actually have to identify specific locations where they're going to operate from, at least the nests. Now, I understand that they can drop them on the right-of-way just about anywhere, and if they do that, then, you know, they would be subject to being picked up if someone left them in the middle of the sidewalk and it became an obstruction. If they didn't go and get it and correct the situation, then it could be impounded. We would probably want to put that in the contract to make it clear to them that the public ways have to be maintained. But all of these things can be addressed in an agreement. And they have agreements with other cities that are fairly close to what our requirements would be. I've looked at one with Austin, Texas that I think is very good. I've had conversations with the city attorney at Norman, and they are looking at basically the same thing we are. So there are some models out there for us, and we can address all of this.
In terms of numbers, we would also need some guidance, because I happen to know from a lot of conversation about this subject that they're going to purchase 100 permits from Oklahoma State to allow them to park these things on campus only at a bike rack.
Those will be contained just on the Oklahoma State University campus, or they can go anywhere?
It's my understanding that they can use them on campus and that they have to be parked at a bike rack when they're left, or they will be impounded. And they have to.
Ride it
But
off
how could they
Yeah,
keep
you
them
could.
on campus?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
You can ride them off
So
campus.
So
But
they're going to do
So there's
100, and then,
100.
so then we would have a separate number.
to my knowledge, none of the nests are on Oklahoma State University
No,
campus. They're all on the city.
I think we're talking about the same 100 scooters. They just go on and
Oh,
off
they're just going
campus.
off.
So if you picked one up downtown and you rode it to campus and wanted to park it there,
So it's
you'd
Right.
have a
100 total,
permit.
It's not 100 on.
So they'd basically put the OSU permit on all the ones they had in town, just in case they end up on campus.
Which
Yeah.
would, makes sense.
Now, you said they had 40 here now, correct?
That's our understanding, yes.
So they may expand that in the future, is what we're.
Right.
Not only that company, but also there are two other companies called Lime and Jump. And Lime actually provides not only scooters, they also provide motorized bicycles and do some bicycle sharing. So we could very well see them as well as these entities. I don't know that Lime is operating in Oklahoma just yet. I know they were that was the entity that was talking to Oklahoma City when they arrived there.
The one that was trying to do it correctly with Oklahoma City before
Yeah.
they were usurped. If we do the itinerant merchant permit with them for now, and we work on a new ordinance with a new permitting procedure specifically for these kinds of businesses, would we be able to force them to go to the new scheme once it's in place, or would they be allowed to keep their itinerant merchant permit until it expires or until the end of its term?
Probably they would be able to keep their permit until it expired, but I can't imagine the permit being any less restrictive or less restrictive than what we will probably recommend.
Okay.
In this itinerant merchant permit, would that be the place to affix a fee schedule?
Yes, ma'am. And my understanding is that they pay $1 per scooter per day. So that's their offer, and that's actually very consistent with what kind of a fee would be charged in this kind of a situation. So, and that seems to be nationwide.
Okay, So very similar to what Memphis had.
Yes, ma'am.
The one-time application fee.
Yes, Cambridge and Memphis and several places like that have done that. Nashville.
And then those funds would be applied to
Goes
creating.
into the general fund, or if you want to earmark the funds, then the council's free to do that.
Okay, so it could go either way.
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions about the right-of-way permit issue or the itinerant merchant option? Do we need a motion and a,
I don't know that we need a motion, we just need to know that that's, if that seems to be an acceptable solution, then that we'll get started on that immediately.
And you had mentioned that we're going to give them to the end of the week for this itinerant merchant approval. Is that long enough to get that process completed? How long
Oh,
is
it
an
should
itinerant?
be.
Yeah, okay. Just want to make sure we're not setting anybody up for failure.
No, I don't think we are.
Okay.
If it became a problem, I mean, I think we can deal with that, but
we would just ask them to at least have their application submitted by Friday, correct?
that's what I'm saying is
Yeah.
submitted. I'm not
Okay.
I'm not saying we have to have it granted, but they need to have everything for us to start reviewing. And it's not a particularly onerous process.
And I assume we're not asking them for any information that every other city they've done this to hasn't asked them for, so I
Yeah.
can't imagine that
Right.
it would be a difficult application to get together.
They can copy and paste it from the city they did last week. Just replace the
That's
name.
probably where the contract will come
Right,
from.
good.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
Just one thing that just struck me on occasion, and Mr. Dorman may be able to answer this. On occasion, we have a local retailer, a full-time business here that kind of creeps out into the right-of-way displaying items, and on occasion, we have to remind them that they can't do that. Would a new ordinance consider all types of retail rental?
And that needs to be part of the larger solution, I think. But yes, we could do that. We actually do some permitting already because
Well-
we've permitted tables on Main Street, for
Right.
example.
And crazy days and some other things that happen around town where items are displayed on the sidewalk, we permit that, but it's for a limited period of time. Special events.
Oh, I think all of this stuff can be addressed. It can't be addressed short-term, but certainly long-term, we could do that. Okay.
Okay. I'll,
The second item would be the amendments to, I had mentioned Chapter 12 because we do need to tweak the itinerant merchant language just a little bit. That's no big deal. A couple of words will take care of it. 29, as I mentioned earlier, because these scooters don't fit neatly in the scheme that the state has created, we need to create a new section for these. And I think that the best way to do it is just lump them and all other types of motorized conveyances that aren't licensed motorcycles into one group. And that means that you will have, there'll be some scooters and some things like that that are bigger than what the Bird scooters are, but they're not, the state does not require them to be licensed. And you can have a 150cc engine on some of these things now, and that's not a small engine. I mean, it'll run a big lawnmower and some things like that. But so what I propose is that we can come up with that interim category fairly quickly. I can actually have that back for you for your meeting on the 10th for a consideration and possibly a first read. And if it is acceptable, then the next step would be to second read it, which we could do on the 17th, and it has an emergency clause, and then there'd be no question at that point as to whether these uses would be acceptable. And that would take care of it in the short term. In the longer term, I think we ought to look at all of these modes in a larger sense, as Norman mentioned, in using the right-of-way and all of these different things. So there would be amendments to Chapter 12, probably amendments to Chapter 37, and possibly something to 41, depending on the type of easements and stuff that are implicated. But that would take some time, and we would very much like to get the impact of BPAC in particular. I think this is just right up their alley. I think they could provide us some very valuable assistance with this. And so I would ask that if you allow us to go this route, we'll fix the immediate problem, and then look at the larger solution that will take care of all of these modes, and have the manager enlist that entity and also the transportation division in working on this ordinance and bringing that back to you by the end of the year.
We have a preliminary report from BPAC. It just so happened that when all this happened, they had a meeting scheduled for that night, and I prevailed upon them to give us some preliminary information. One of the things that I would say to you is that just as we prohibit bicycles in business districts, that we need to prohibit these things on the sidewalk in business districts. And frankly, from having watched the operation of some of these over the weekend, I really think that if possible, if legal, we need to require helmets for those under 18.
Here.
And I wanted to clarify for those of you out there, the BPAC, we were talking, when we talk in acronyms, the Bicycle Pedestrian Ad Hoc Committee, is that correct? We formed that 3 years ago? That was formed about 3 or 4 years ago? And they were instrumental in kind of planning some future things for Stillwater as far as accessibility for all modes of transportation. And so I think this committee, it fits right in with what that, but I just wanted to clarify what BPAC was. So.
Right. I think
Do we know just what is the top speed of one of these things?
A little less than 25.
A little less than 25.
Which statutorily is mandated too. If they go more than 25, then they're technically a motorcycle and require a license.
They will scoot.
Yeah.
You go 25 on your bicycle.
No pun
right?
intended.
I'm
Or
going
pun
really,
intended.
really downhill.
Yeah.
Pretty sharp grade.
And I saw a couple, there were 2 riders on one Saturday night that I saw, 2 people on one, which kind of dwarfs the thing. It's kind of interesting.
On the traffic issue currently, under current codes, we think they are illegal to ride on the street, obeying the same laws as a bicycle,
Yes.
correct? And we know that they are illegal to ride in business districts on the sidewalks, no matter what.
Oh, yeah, under any circumstance.
Under any circumstances, they're illegal on the sidewalks in business districts. They're legal on the streets and treated like a bicycle on the street. What we're not particularly clear about is whether they're allowed on other sidewalks outside of business districts.
Right, that's where the definitional coverage breaks down.
So until we've got something more tailored with the help of BPAC, those would be the standards that would be enforced moving forward.
That's how I was going to write it into the revision to Title 29 that'll come back on the 10th.
Okay.
I think just as BPAC said in their report, that this is a time to really focus on alternative modes of transportation, and a great chance to be very out front with all our citizens about bicycles, motor scooters, et cetera, and the appropriate use. I know that there are probably at least a few people who use bicycles who are not aware of all the appropriate ways to ride. And so I think it's a great opportunity for that. And I do also appreciate your recognition that bike sharing will be a portion of this too. And we need to really be thinking about all of those.
Yeah, the really frustrating thing about this is that I can see advantages to these things. Personally, I think they're much safer on the sidewalk than in the street, but because of the weight differences and all kinds of things. But their business model to just come in unannounced and drop these things and say, deal with it. And then, frankly, in discussions with company representative, not very cooperative, at least to begin with, at all, and pretty argumentative. So, really unfortunate business model.
So we're going to move forward with trying to get them to do an itinerant merchant permit and work on the changes necessary for the business model or the business license in the future for this and similar types of businesses.
Yes, sir.
We're going to work on the traffic ordinance and a full-fledged, work with the BPAC to come up with a full-fledged set of standards around use and where they can go and where they should be and safety and all that sort of thing.
Yes, sir.
On the issue of obstruction and leaving them in the middle of sidewalks, I mean, my understanding is we're empowered currently to impound these if they are left in the middle of a sidewalk, if they are obstructing a ramp, if they're left in front of a business's door that, is being obstructed by them, that sort of thing. These are, we are and we will be potentially impounding them if they are left in places they're not supposed to be.
Yes, sir.
Including private property. If
Including private property.
if someone has one of these things dropped in their yard and they don't want it there, they can call us and we'll come get it.
Okay. What else do we need to discuss here? Do you have enough to go on?
I'm ready to go if this is an acceptable plan of action.
If they're unsuccessful in meeting the deadline, what happens to the scooters?
I would probably recommend to the manager that he start picking them up. We hold them until they either comply or come get them.
I think that's similar to what Oklahoma City did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure where I read it. I've read a number of different cities, but one city requires that when you leave your scooter, you have to take a picture
Really?
of where you have left it. And I'm not exactly sure how that follows up. I mean, how that gives anybody any accountability.
Was it something in the app? I wonder where you provide the picture.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it would make sense if you dropped it and you say, I left it on this corner, and then it turns up somewhere else, then you could come back and say, well, here's my picture of where I left it. These things,
How that
I
protects
mean,
you a whole lot.
yeah,
Well,
it's
I wonder if it'd hold you accountable, though. I mean, I think that's I think pushing multimodal transportation is so very important, and obviously with our student body here and everything, but I think one of my main concerns is just the maintaining accessibility and things for other pedestrians.
I would say in the app and in their terms of service in the app, which I downloaded so I could see where these things were. I haven't ridden one yet. I will when they're legal. The company does tell you, don't leave them in the middle of the road, park them by bike racks, park them out of the right of way. They do attempt to they say, don't put two people on them. You have to put in your license. You have to be 16 to rent the thing, which I don't know how you could do that I guess you use your parents' credit card, because you've also got to put a credit card in there. So, I think we do need to also take into account the fact that if people are using them with two people on them, or I've heard that they saw people, like the parent rented it and were letting a 8-year-old or 9-year-old kid ride it around, which is against both their terms of service and probably should be against whatever ordinance we come up with in these discussions. It seems like they do try to help their riders know what those rules are, but we should certainly reinforce those in what we come up with as well.
Well, and I think, like Vice Mayor said, I think it's a great opportunity for us to educate our community on just different modes of transportation and safety involved with that. So
It is in the app to have Bird access your camera and take a picture of where you parked the bird.
Okay. All right, anything further on the issue of scooters? Thank you all. Appreciate all the staff time that went into this. This is definitely a major use of time where we have plenty of other things. Staff certainly has plenty of other things they're trying to work on. And like Manager McNichol said, to have a business come in and basically short circuit the city's work is very frustrating. But I do appreciate what staff has done to try to deal with a situation that was less than ideal. All right, so that takes us down to item 7, ordinances on second reading. This would be ordinance 3416. Before I read this ordinance, this is our zoning ordinance around new medical marijuana state laws. After the first reading of the ordinance, I had 2 people approach me to ask about the question of indoor grow operations. If you recall, we have in our zoning ordinance, it talks about ag use for growing, industrial use for processing, and basically where a pharmacy is for dispensaries. I think it seems like a lot of these grow operations will be inside in larger warehouse kind of spaces rather than outside. And so it would seem to make sense that the availability of industrial buildings for indoor grow operations should be considered in our zoning ordinance. I did ask Mr. Dorman if we could look at that and potentially insert that into this ordinance before we do finally pass it. And he indicated that they could do that. Is that, or we could look at it?
We can do that, but because it is it's a fairly significant substantive change, my recommendation would be that you push it back down to the Planning Commission and let them take a look at it first and send you back a recommendation before you
Okay.
move any further on it.
If I may, Mayor, we received information that there is a voluminous number of pages at the legislature and proposed regulation. I think this is going to be a moving target that we will be constantly modifying.
Yeah.
Depending on what the legislature does and depending on the outcome of lawsuits and all kinds of different things that you'll probably be tired of hearing about it by the time it's all settled.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think it would be best if we get the ordinance the zoning here as close to what's actually going to be, I think,
Sure.
the desired uses, so at this point. So do we need a vote or anything like that to send it back down?
I would suggest that you make a motion to refer it back to the Planning Commission for the express purpose of considering adding industrial zoning classifications to the growing classification, and that they take this up at their next meeting on the 11th and return it back to you on the 17th of September.
I will make that motion. Can I make that motion?
You just made it.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to refer this ordinance back to the Planning Commission for those purposes. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, that action is taken. Thank you all. All right, that takes us to item 7, reports from officers and boards. Mr. Dorman.
Request an executive session pursuant to 25 OS subsection 307B1 of the Oklahoma Open Meeting Act for the purpose of confidential communication regarding the employment, appointment, promotion, demotion, disciplining, or resignation of Stillwater City Manager Norman McNichol, Stillwater City Attorney John Dorman, and Municipal Judge Tanya Ron.
Thank you, sir. Mr. McNichol.
Yes, sir. With progress comes inconvenience sometimes, and this has been previously announced, but to update on the Western Road and 32nd Avenue Waterline Project, westbound lane of 32nd Avenue from Western Road to Sanger Road will be closed through traffic tomorrow, Tuesday, August 28th. Water service along 32nd will be interrupted between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m.
The one lane will be closed?
One lane will be closed.
Are they going to do one lane like both ways?
My understanding is that
like-
westbound lane will be closed, period, because of the amount of equipment that will be in the road to be able to get that job done in one day.
Well, but are they going to direct traffic each way so that people can still go each way? They were just stopping the traffic? I guess you should avoid that area tomorrow, but.
One should avoid that area. It'll be horrible trying to get your kids to school, particularly if you're going westbound. Again, my understanding is that it's full closure.
Don't drive on Western tomorrow. 32nd.
32nd.
Sorry, don't drive on 32nd tomorrow. Thank you. Councilor Zanotti.
Yes, this week, property owners in the 12th Avenue planning area will receive an information packet containing a letter, 2 overlay ordinances, and a postage-paid postcard. We're conducting a poll of interest from property owners for the application of either of the 2 overlay ordinances to their specific property. Property owners are asked to complete the postcard and return it by Sunday, September 30th, 2018. So be looking for that in the mail.
If you live
In the
right
12th
around 12th
Avenue
Street.
planning area, yes.
Vice Mayor.
Yes, that seems like long ago that we had that storm, but if you still have yard debris, cleanup starts today through Friday, September 14th. The city will collect your storm debris up to 8 feet long on your regular collection days in that time frame, except for next Monday because of Labor Day. Full details of the pickup are on the city's website.
We still have trash collection on Labor Day. We just won't
True.
have yard waste collection on Labor Day. All right, Counselor Wedlake.
Yeah, so for those of you out there that don't know, the first OSU football game of the season is this Thursday. The city and OSU Athletics offer free parking downtown and shuttles to and from the stadium before and after the game. Keep in mind that we also implement a post-game transportation plan to help direct traffic. More information and a map is on the city's website at stillwater.org. So,
That is
Go
the
Pokes.
best ever. You don't have to fight the traffic leaving the stadium. Park downtown, take the shuttle, drops you off on the north side of the stadium. Easy, picks you up after the game, 2 hours prior and 2 hours after, I think.
Yep.
3 hours? 3 hours, so,
And it's free.
and it's free.
It's free. Thank you. Counselor Jaloski.
Thank you for joining us at the airport this past Friday to celebrate 2 years of partnership and successes. More than 100,000 passengers have flown to or from Stillwater on American Airlines since August 2016. Remember to search for flights using airport code SWO on the airline's website.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, that takes us to item 9, executive session. Is there a motion?
Motion to move into executive session.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to enter executive session. Please vote. With a vote of 5-0, we'll now enter executive session.